disclaimer that this is not a feel-good sermon this morning. As Paul tells us in his first letter to the Corinthians, sometimes it's time for solid food. And this morning is that time. As we look at this 5th chapter in the book of Matthew, and the ending verses of that chapter, which are not included in the reading today, I want to highlight as kind of a summary of what this Sermon on the Mount is talking about. The end of the 5th chapter says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." In this 5th chapter of Matthew, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he is calling us higher and calling us deeper. Jesus is calling us to a higher standard and a deeper walk. Even though Jesus uses dangerous and provocative language, he says, "You have heard that it was said, but I say to you." This is not any abolishment of the other sacred law. In fact, Jesus is calling people to a higher way of life that both fulfills the intent of the law and exceeds the rigor of the religious scholars and Pharisees who focused on a merely external conformity and technical perfection. As the manifesto continues, Jesus applies the same. "You have heard, but I say." This pattern he applies to deeply important issues for individuals and for society: sexuality and marriage and oaths and revenge. Jesus summons those who would be his followers to radical devotion and radical dependence on God. His followers must go beyond the letter of the law to meet and understand the spirit of the law. His followers must do what is right when only God is looking. His followers must depend on God for their needs and pursue God's interests rather than their own, and they must leave spiritual measurements of other folks' hearts to God. In short, true people of the kingdom live for God and not for themselves. To be faithful to this text, we must let Jesus' radical demands confront us. We must let the demands confront us where we are with all the unnerving force with which they would have struck the folks who first heard it in that sermon. And it is the ending verses of this sermon in chapter 5 of Matthew that Jesus asks bluntly and forthrightly, us to go higher and deeper and holds us to a higher standard. And so today, beloved, I'm preaching a sermon of challenge to all of us, myself included. Because Jesus calls us to take a look at ourselves in a way that can be disturbing. What more are you doing than others? As my wife said last week, you can do better. This biting question is a call for introspection. What are you doing? What more are you doing than others? Asks Jesus. This insightful inquiry forces us to rip away all pretension and see ourselves as we really are. Jesus speaks to us today. What more are you doing than others? You can do better. Let's think about that question for a moment, if we dare. Because the question is not what the priests or the wardens or other members do through or with their religion. The question is not what my neighbors, my family members, or friends do in or by their religion. Questions of commitment and sincerity and faith and righteousness of others are some of the easiest to debate. They're some of the easiest to discuss and face. But the question I would ask you to think about is this. What more are you doing than others? What is there that is distinctive about my living, my loving, and my giving that separates me from others who do not profess to be Christians? When people see me on my job, is there anything about me, about my language, about my personality, the way I carry myself, that informs them that I'm a Christian? Can people see any glow of joy or peace or niceness, character, trustworthiness, or style in me that lets them know that I have been bought with a price, that I am no longer my own, and that I am living for the one who loved me enough to redeem me? When I return home from church, can the people with whom I live see any difference? Oh, you're quiet this morning. Or am I as evil and disagreeable and difficult to live with as I was before I came? Are there any positive changes in my attitude around the house that can be directly traced to the influence of my faith? When I walk across the schoolyard or sit in the classroom, is there anything distinctive about me, even as a young Christian? What more are you doing than others? What do I do that expresses who I am as God's child and what I represent in terms of a godly moral code without my having to constantly tell folk? Because if you have to constantly tell folk who you are, then something is wrong. If we must constantly remind people that we are church officers or pastors or parents or adults or husbands or wives, something is wrong. Because evidently we're not acting like we should. People who carry themselves, beloved, in a respectable way, I believe, receive respect. People who carry themselves in a loving way receive love. claim to be in speech? What am I doing more than others? When my patience wears thin and I'm pushed beyond my breaking point and lose my temper, do I act any differently than others? Is there any more restraint of words or actions? When trouble erupts in my life, when trials and problems knock on my door, is there anything distinctive about the way that I bear my burdens? Is there anything distinctive about the way that I face my stress and handle my conflict? When sickness attacks my body, is there anything identifiably and distinctively different in my attitude regarding my affliction? Or the way that I endure my own personal suffering? When disappointments come, is there anything different about the way that I meet and handle my frustrations? What are you doing more than others when failure haunts me? Do I show any greater determination to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat? When I face overwhelming odds, do I show a greater faith to accomplish the impossible because I know that if God is for me, then God is more than the whole world against me? When death removes a loved one, do I mourn as one without hope of another day of greeting where there'll be no more goodbye? What more are you doing than others? You can do better. When faith is required, how much faith do we demonstrate? Is it more than others? When vision is required, how much vision do we demonstrate? Is it more than others? When forgiveness is required, how much forgiveness do we demonstrate? Is it more than others? When tolerance for the differences of others and patience with the weaknesses and faults of others is required, how much tolerance and patience do we demonstrate? Is it more than others? When love is required, how much love do we demonstrate? Is it more than others? How different are our thoughts from others? How different are our desires, the desires of our hearts, from others? In a money-hungry, money-grabbing, money-worshiping world, how different are our attitudes regarding money from others? In a society that has come to believe that gadgetry is the measure of all things, and that life really does consist in the abundance of possessions, how different is our attitude toward material possessions from others? Or are we Christians also caught in the elusive trap of substituting quality of life and character with quantity of things? What are we doing more than others? How different is our attitude regarding status and the use of power from others? In a world of selfishness, how different is our sense of altruism and praxis of sacrifice from others? What are you doing? What am I doing more than others? There are times, beloved, when we believe that we are displaying Christian virtue when we are only demonstrating ordinary human character. Here's what I mean. We are nice to those who are nice to us. We remember the hands that have helped us and the feet that have kicked us. We are more than willing to extend ourselves to those who helped us, and the only time some of us show real patience is when we're biding our time until we can get back at them. When we return to kindness, with the kindness, we feel as if we have manifested some great Christian virtue. Well, beloved, according to Jesus, loving our friends is no great achievement. Anybody, whether Christian or not, can do that. Being nice to those who are nice to us is no great Christian act of benevolence. Anyone has sense enough to be nice to those who are nice to them. Good politics returns favor for favor. And even a dog has sense enough not to bite the hand that feeds it. We're not being great Christians just because we love our families and take care of them. Racist people love their families. Gang leaders and drug dealers love their families. They wouldn't dare feed their families the poison that they give to others. Being a responsible family member is noble, beloved. I don't take anything away from that, and I believe that it is unchristian not to take care of our family responsibilities, but loving one's family is not a distinctively Christian virtue as such. Anyone can love family, but the question for us today is, what more are you doing than others? In a racist world, anyone can love his or her own kind. In a world that denigrates and oppresses rather than celebrates and respects the racial, sexual, and gender, cultural, and political differences among people, anyone can salute his or her brothers and sisters only. We live in a world where, under the pretense of fear and the protection of so-called stand your ground in this era, a young black child's life is expendable, and we've forgotten all about it. An unarmed Jordan Davis can be killed in cold blood for playing loud music, and an unarmed Trayvon Martin can be killed like prey for walking home from the convenience store while black. We've forgotten about all those things. We moved on. And the court system in this country has been anemic in justice, but powerful in sending the message to the world that in America, black life is not valuable. White fear is more important than black life. And if we as Americans are serious about forming a more perfect union, by obliterating the defining issue of our time, which I believe is racism, or what Du Bois called the color line, we must be moral leaders and not be afraid to tell the truth about America's maladies in the 21st century. In this time of impeached presidents, in this consciousness moment, where it seems the world has suddenly stopped on its axis, in this consciousness moment, let us realize what time it is. Let us remember that we are at 11:59 p.m. and we are either on the cusp of a midnight or the cusp of a new day. In this consciousness moment, where the world has slowed down for us for just a minute, we must realize that we are also in a rollback moment. We're we're in a moment where some want to bring back the good old days. When we realize that we are in a moment where we may witness the dismantling of public education. When we realize that we're in a moment where we have witnessed the Voting Rights Act gutted and voter suppression find new life. When we realize that we're in a moment when by executive order one can be targeted because of one's religion. When we realize that we're in a moment when we can possibly witness the dismantling of all that we think we have gained in the civil rights movement, we must realize that we are in a rollback moment. And we must, in this moment of consciousness, resist with all we have. Our baptismal covenant advises us to do so, to resist evil. This is the moment we are living in. And we are called as baptized Christians to do more than others, to resist evil. Not much leadership is required to exploit feelings of hostility and distrust and fear between races and cultures. Anyone can keep people with a history of division and misunderstanding divided. In an era of increasing racial polarization, Jesus has a question for those of us who are called by his name. What more are you doing than others? You can do better. Jesus calls us to the extraordinary. Jesus calls us to go beyond the minimum. Jesus calls us to stop skating through life. He challenges us to go farther and do more than others. Thus, he says to us in the ending of this chapter, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." What more are we doing than others? What more are we doing than others in our loving? What more are we doing than others in our living? As we are called to be extraordinary livers and lovers, I believe it boils down to this. We are also called to be extraordinary givers. Givers of ourselves, givers of our substance, contributors to making God's kingdom come on earth, contributors to the beloved community. We must give. One cannot love without giving. Giving is as basic and integral to our faith as loving is, as heat is to fire, as wetness is to water, as darkness to night, as light to day. So is giving basic to our faith, giving of ourselves. As breathing is basic to living, so is giving. As one cannot be a Christian without loving, neither can one be a Christian without giving. When we reach the point where we ask ourselves the question, what more are we doing? It meets us at the nexus of our giving. What are we doing in our giving? Giving of ourselves and our substance and pushing ourselves to the giving is at the center of our faith, and it is impossible to be a Christian without it. As surely as we must be born again to enter the kingdom of heaven, we must give. As surely as we must bear a cross, we must give. As surely as we must forgive, we must give. As surely as we preach or witness to the word, we must give. As surely as we must breathe, we must give. For us, to give is to live. Everything that lives gives. Yes. Not to give is a sign of death. Dead flowers give no fresh fragrance. Dead people don't give. Or at least they're not supposed to. People who try to hold on to everything that they have, not just their substance, but themselves, have hearts and pulses that beat, but inside they're dead. You may know the comparison between the two great bodies of water in ancient Palestine. One body of water has no inlets or outlets. It retains all of its water for itself, receiving nothing from any other body and giving nothing to any other body. No boats sail across its surface, no fish swim in its depths, no children play along its shore. It is never mentioned in the Gospels. Jesus is never recorded as going there. It is known as the Dead Sea. The other body of water gives and receives from other tributaries. For centuries, its water was the mainstay of the fishing industry for that region. Along its shores, children play, and across its surface, boats sail. We read of its influence throughout the Gospels, for Jesus visited there many times. It is known as the Sea of Galilee. To give is to live. It is a place where we do more than others. Jesus described himself as the bread of life, the light of the world, the door, the good shepherd, and the true vine, all of which gives. Bread gives itself to be eaten. Light gives itself to chase away the darkness. The door opens to greener pastures. The shepherd gives himself or herself to the sheep, and the vine gives itself to the grape. But bread that is not eaten becomes stale. Light that is not given becomes midnight. Hinges rust on doors that are not open. A vine that does not give becomes useless. Thank God we have a Savior who gives. What more are we doing than others? Because in the end, it's about what we give to help usher in God's kingdom, God's beloved community where justice reigns. What more are we giving? We must give more than others. God made the sun and it gives. God made the moon and it gives. God made stars and they give. God made the air and it gives. God made the clouds and they give. God made the earth, it gives. God made the sea, it gives. God made the trees, they give. God made flowers and plants and birds and beasts and all creation, and they give. God made man. God made woman. And God made humanity to work in cooperation with God's Spirit to give. Question for us is, what more are you doing? What more are you giving than others?